Hi everyone. Thank you again for coming to this talk, Psych Odyssey, Students' Perspectives on Navigating Niche Paths. And thank you to my speakers, Rachel and Chloe, for coming on board for today as well. So just a quick introduction. My name is Kalin, and I'm the host for today from SG Psych Staff. So just a quick introduction about SG Psych Staff. SG Psych Staff is a society that helps students along their journey. Especially in the areas of psychology, counseling, and social work. So, if you like to learn more about how we can navigate in this journey in a smoother or more effective manner, please stay tuned to our information and the connections that we are making with everybody within SG Psych Staff. So, if you have any questions for today, for the speakers, feel free to scan the QR code on the bottom right of your screen. Yeah. So just a quick introduction. I believe the speakers will share more about themselves and their journey as well. So just a very short introduction. Rachel has graduated from JCU this year from Masters of Psychology, Clinical Psych. And for Chloe, she also finished her Masters this year from NUS in the Clinical Psych as well. So maybe I will get maybe I'll get Rachel to share a little bit more about your journey and about yourself, as before we go into all the questions that everybody have for the both of you.
For the introduction, and thank you everyone for spending your Saturday to listen to some of the things that we'll be sharing today. So my name is Rachel, and I'm as Colleen shared earlier, I'm currently a clinical psychologist at KK Women's and Children's Hospital. So I am under the Department of Psychological Medicine, so providing therapy services under the Women's Mental Wellness Service as well as the Children and Adolescent Mental Wellness Service. So I primarily see women through who are experiencing psychiatric disorders perinatally, so from pregnancy, post-pregnancy, and also other gynecological disorders as well, conditions, sorry. And as I do see some children, but I do see primarily women. So children, we do see some with also psychiatric disorders, but also neurodevelopmental disorders primarily. Yeah, so that's, I work quite closely with the psychiatrists and clinical counselors on the team as well. So it is quite a multidisciplinary setting, like, it's quite common in the public healthcare sector. So a little bit about, I guess, my journey. It's quite an interesting one. My psychology journey, psychology journey. So I wouldn't say that I started out knowing that okay, psychology is actually something I wanted to do. So it was something that kind of unfolded in its own way, as I journeyed through as well. So I actually did a double major in media and communications and psychology. So it was just something that I was like, oh, okay, they both sound pretty interesting to me because I think I'm a big believer in studying what I'm interested in. So it doesn't feel like a chore during my studies. So during my undergrad, interestingly, psychology was something I excelled way better in compared to my other major. And I think just across the years, the topics just became something that just resonated with me. And I think naturally, it just was something that I guess the interest definitely built along the way. And then quite naturally, I wanted to pursue my honors lah. So because in Australia, it was an option. I did my undergrad in the University of Melbourne. So it was a 3-year program. And the honors year is an optional year. So I think by my second year or so, I was quite sure that, psychology was something that I wanted to pursue, more focused on it, so to speak. So I did my honors year, and I finished that up, and then I came back to Singapore. I did want to do my master's quite quickly, I think, as soon as I graduated and came back. But I think, as we all know by now, the postgraduate options are quite competitive as well, not only in Singapore but also in Australia. So I think I applied in 20, so I graduated in 2016. 2017 or 2018, can't quite remember. I did apply to the GCU Masters actually. So why I picked GCU was also because I did an APAC accredited, so the Australian psychological accredited program there. So I think quite naturally GCU was quite a natural pathway for me lah. So it wasn't too much of a consideration I had. So when I applied to JCU, at the time I didn't get it. Yeah. So and I think I I think that memory was quite poignant for me. Lah. So I think it was quite at that point in time really, really very crushing. And then but at the end of the day, I think I didn't see it as a, because like I mentioned, it was already something that naturally I knew I wanted to pursue. So whether I did it immediately or whether I did it, a few years, I reapply again, it really didn't matter. So I saw it as an opportunity to kind of gain work experience, which I think a lot of you here might be considering to, kind of improve your odds of getting into the program. So I had the similar considerations in mind as well. So I decided to kind of, okay, I'll drop the application for now, and then I'll just focus on gaining work experience, which I did. So I started off in early intervention centers. So even in undergrad, whenever I came back from my summer holidays or my winter holidays, I would do internships here and there just to understand the different, because psychology on its own, it's quite there's different flavors of psychology as you will. So I started off in educational psychology, did a couple of internships in early intervention centers. And then after my unsuccessful application to the master's program, I similarly went into an private early intervention center where I became a ABA therapist. So working primarily with preschoolers with neurodevelopmental disorders. Therefore I think close to 2 years, and then I wanted to see what it was like in different contexts as well. So I think that's important. So I wanted to see what it was like in a semi-public, not public yet, but semi-public sector. So that's when I transitioned beyond child work to also adult work as well, because I think that's something that was kind of a gap in my experience. So I transitioned to Minds. That's like they call it a voluntary welfare organization. So partially public. That's my first foray into the social service sector lah. So I was working with adults with special needs as well, so intellectual disabilities in the training and development center. That was a very interesting experience. I think the learning curve there was pretty steep, but also helped me to understand, when you go into an organization more public, that how they train psychologists. I think that was a big learning experience for me as well. And then I think along after Minds, I also transitioned to now a full public sector. So I went to the Singapore Police Force. I know it's very different, right? So let me just share my thought process. So so mine was very much, yes, the clinical work and things like that. But I think now that at the back of my head, I was also wanting to reapply to the master's program. I think having worked, right, a few years, I think it was more apparent to me that I wanted to be sure that the master's was something that I really wanted, because it was 2 years full time, and it is a commitment, as well as it's a demanding program lah. So I think that being said, it was not only did I want to know that clinical psychologist was for me, I wanted to, on top of knowing what you want, knowing what you don't want. So in SPF, I tried what do you call that? Sorry, organizational psychology. Yeah, so I think that was a flavor of psychology that I was kind of interested in, but I didn't know what it was lah, basically. So I think for me, really getting exposure to different flavors of psychology was important for me to really understand which area I wanted to specialize in. So I think at the end of the day, it came full circle. After SPF, it was a contract position. So by the end of it, I was like, okay, I'm quite sure clinical was something I wanted to do. So I reapplied in 2021, I think, and then I got accepted into the master's program for the 2022 batch. So that's kind of like yeah, my journey to the master's program. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. So it's so quite a very
Yeah.
different kind of changes as you move across from working with children to working with adults, then working in the private sector, and then slowly working in the full time in the public sector as well, and then varied types of work like
Mm.
more clinical work and then organizational psychology areas of work, and then so it's quite varying and very different in the sense trying to, like you mentioned, right, trying to look into what are the gaps that you may need and then filling up the gaps as well. So yeah, so
Mm.
that's really really interesting. Yeah, thanks, Rachel. So maybe I could get Chloe to share your experiences as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Chloe. Lovely to see you all. Thanks for having me here today. So as what Carlin said, I'm still a current clinical psychology master student at NUS. So just to know, I'm speaking in my personal capacity and not NUS. I don't represent NUS. Um, my path is slightly different to Rachel's because I was very sure that I wanted to do clin psych as soon as I reached high school. I did my high school in the UK, so we had exposure to psychology as a subject much earlier. And so all of the decisions that I made for my career was actually, I had clin psych in my mind. So before joining this program, I already possess a master's degree in mental health because I heard there were people who got in with this degree. And essentially because it's a counseling degree, I've been a registered counselor since. And back then when I applied for the program, I was also a BCABA. So that would be what Rachel also did, ABA, applied behavioral analysis. So this particular qualification of mine, it has expired, but I was told to share about my journey building up to the ClinPsych Master's program. So I thought to include it here, just in case anyone's interested. And if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. So in terms of my work experience, I would say there are two highlights that probably are what got me into the program. So the first one, trainee counselor, so that was part of my placement for my counseling degree. I worked mostly with young adults, and they were mostly ethnic Chinese also, although there was a combination of like Hong Kong people as well as Taiwanese. The clinical presentation was not very varied. It was mostly depression, anxiety, and work stress. Um, and I cannot emphasize enough that, okay, this is maybe your title, but what matters more is your job role. So I also wrote something about my roles there, like doing intake, therapy, case notes writing, because that is what you essentially need to learn. I mean, if a placement site sends you there, if you get sent to a placement site and all you have to do is admin work, of course, that's not very useful for your career. Okay. And then on the next slide, that will be another highlight of my career, I would say. I was a lead behavioral therapist, so again, ABA. So in this experience, I actually got to work a lot more with children. And because with children, you also need input from their parents to help with the children's, socio, emotional, and behavioral problems. So I also got to do some parent trainings back then. And in this role, I actually had a more senior role. So I also did some staff training. Um, yes. And this population is more of expats. Um, as with Rachel, I also worked more with those with neurodevelopmental disorders, meaning ASD, ADHD, but I also had a handful of children with conduct disorders, impulse disorders, and selective mutism. And I think what was good about this this job or this work experience is that I got to work in a multidisciplinary team. I got to work with teachers. I got to work with clin psychs, also occupational therapists and speech therapists. So you could see how everyone could work together and distribute the work among us, but all are working towards helping the client with meeting his or her clinical or learning outcomes. The last one, it's not really a highlight, but it's relevant to clin psych, so I'll just include it here. I was a research assistant for some clin psych and also ed psych PhDs and also Psych Ds. Yeah. And as you understand, clin psychs are supposed to be scientist practitioners, so having research experience would be good. Thank you.
So yeah, so thanks, Chloe. So it sounds like, and in your journey, it's like you mentioned, it consists of the ABA part, it consists of the um it consists of the ABA part, it consists of like different studying, like different masters or different kind of work areas, working with different populations, and even working in a school, right? To actually expose you to different kinds of population to be able to get in the role. So um maybe I will, and there's a lot of questions that has come in. So with this with this, we put out and we ask people for questions for them to submit to us before even we started this talk today. So let's go with the first question for, I mean, any one of you can actually answer any of these questions. So starting off, we thought that it would be nice to think about the how you prepare and how you explore for your master's courses, right? In terms of in JCU or in terms of in NUS, like even like the first question, how do you know? How do you actually know that this was the right choice for you? Maybe Chloe, you mentioned that you know this from high school, so yeah. So how do you know?
To me, it came very naturally. I think I just picked up an A-level psychology textbook. And back then, I was not even an A-level student yet. I was still doing my GCSE in the UK. But I picked up an A-levels psychology textbook and I read it and I was so interested in it. I was supposed to study for my own GCSE exams, but I preferred reading that book. So I was very amazed by all of the topics that I was reading. I remember I was reading about behavioral principles. Yeah, and then when I entered undergrad, I remember studying many different psychology subjects, right? And then the one
Mm,
that I really liked was also abnormal psychology, like studying about all of the disorders. So it just came very naturally, like it just clicked. I think if you have a tendency to or a curiosity to want to read more about the subject, it probably says quite a lot about what you're interested in, not just
mm.
about like as a hobby, but also for a future career.
Thanks, Chloe. So yeah, what about you, Rachel? How do you know that clinical psych is, the area for you, knowing that there's so many specializations in psychology?
Yeah, thanks, Colin. So yeah, it was precisely that. I think when it came to the psychology field, right, there's like I mentioned, that there is quite a
Mm,
number of flavors. So I think when you do an undergrad course in psychology, it's great that they expose you to those um different flavors of psychology. So you have developmental psychology, cognitive psychology, even social psychology. And so they really let you have a good, pretty good taster, I would say. And similar to Chloe, I think personally I did gravitate to abnormal psychology as well. I think it was quite, I would say, like a popular also a choice for most of the students as well. So personally I also gravitated to those particular subjects. So yeah, I think, and like I mentioned, I think um along the way also, I think when you get the assignments, or when you get that there are particular topics that you notice that you would probably spend more time or you're more invested in, and things like that,
mm,
the assignments seem more enjoyable. So yeah, so these are, I think, little things that kind of reinforce the interest on the one hand, but also I think, it also kind of starts to pave the way. I wouldn't say there's a right or wrong. So when I read the question, I was like, a right choice. At the point in time, I wouldn't really say, oh, this is the right or like the only choice. But, it's more like I'm just following something that, really, I was interested in. I think it was more like that. I kept it quite organic, I would say. Yeah. So like I mentioned, by I think end of second year or so, when you get to select more like you start to be able to select your elective subjects, right? So the ones that you really want to study, then that's when you probably get to choose more of the clean site based subjects, or other subjects. So it gets narrower and narrower, so to speak. And then by the third year, you kind of, at least for myself, I already knew that I wanted to do the honors so that I can get into a master's program. So yeah, by the third year, it felt quite natural that I would pursue my honors year, and then I would kind of uh do my honors year in a sense that that would set the it would be a stepping stone for me to get into my master's eventually. So I guess the end goal was really there, the master's. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done my honors year. Yeah, to be honest.
So would we say that actually a good exploration of the different modules or the different electives in your undergraduate years, right? That would, getting that exposure would actually allow you to have a clearer picture. We wouldn't say like whether it's the right choice or not, but that helps to give you a clearer picture.
Yes, definitely. Because I mentioned, like I did take some developmental psychology subjects as well, and then still when I was in my undergrad years, when I came back to do my internships, I was still doing it more in the educational psychology space. Yeah,
Mm,
so initially I thought, like that was something, maybe, yeah, it was still an interesting space, but I think over time that also evolved. That's why I was saying that I didn't feel like there was a one right choice. I think it took some exploration, definitely. So that's definitely helpful, not only academically, but when you put yourself when you proactively try out internships in different settings. Yeah, so I think for a period of time, I did consider educational psychology also as a possible postgraduate pathway as well. So yeah, so like I mentioned, I think over time, things just start naturally narrowing out. And for me, I think over time, I guess the consideration of mine is I didn't want to only do assessments. I actually really
mm.
enjoy clinical work, therapy work. So that's why over time I gravitated more towards clinical psychology as well. Yeah.
Okay. So what about you, Chloe? Is there any module or any kind of exploration of work, or like what Rachel mentioned, right? Assessment or therapy that tell you that actually this path, in 2021, that this path in clinical psych, yes, this is the correct one. As moving away from counseling, as you mentioned, or the mental health area. Yeah.
For me, I would say because counseling, they have less to do with diagnosing clients. So while we still need to learn about the different disorders, we don't get to diagnose clients.
Mm,
So yeah, I was interested to see how we can reliably diagnose clients, not just based on the symptoms listed on the DSM-5, but also using actual psychometric measures or like psychometric assessments to see how to support that. I thought that would be like a good skill to possess. That's why I sort of, yeah, prefer to do clinical psychology instead. Although I would say the therapy part, the two can be quite similar depending on what approach that you're taking. Because with clinical psychology, the gold standard really is CBT. And then if your master's program, it happens to also offer CBT, then of course, there will be some overlaps between what you learn in counseling versus clinical psychology.
mm,
And then actually, as with Rachel, I also did consider educational psychology for a bit. But yeah, so in undergrad, I also got to study ed psych as a subject. And I also worked under an ed psych before. I realized that it has more to do with improving the children's maybe reading ability or math ability. So there are a lot of interventions that targeted those.
mm.
Those were more educational interventions, so I was less interested in those essentially. Yeah.
So it sounds like ed psych and clean psych are probably two big contenders, when we think about what are our choices, moving into these areas of masters. So, I mean, obviously there are others, but most people consider this too as well, and it's actually very common because when we speak to a lot of students, these are actually the two areas that most of them are thinking as well. And uh, thanks for the tip as well, like exploring your undergraduate electives and modules as well. Yeah. So coming down to the next question, right? How do you budget for your master's program? Because I understand that the for the JCU and the NUS program, currently it's close to about $80,000 for the 2 years. Do you get any scholarship or yeah, or how do you manage to budget for that, or how do you manage to save up for that as well?
I'm very bad at budgeting. But I would say it would be good if we all know how much we tend to spend, let's say in a month. So I started out recording my expenses every day, but it got too time consuming. So I stopped doing that. But it will be a useful start because of very likely when you start doing your program, you probably cannot take up a second job or like maybe a part-time job because the program is just too tough. I've had classmates who originally started to do that, but then halfway through, of course, they had to quit because you just don't have enough time for everything. So you definitely need to make sure you have enough savings for a full 2 year will be good, but I also think that just to be safe, it's good to be 2.5 years just in
Mm,
case anything happens, not jinxing anyone, but like if there are emergencies, then you might have to take a leave of absence, or maybe you just happen to fail one case study or a placement. You never know, right? Things can happen
yeah.
depending on which site you're sent to. So I think that you need to consider all of these in mind. And I would say for the largest expenditure, like other than rentals and all that, you'll have to consider the transport, the food, the self-care activities. And also I call it materials, but it's more about like therapy materials or like maybe trainings that you want to join. Um, yeah, because I mean, the universities, they try to provide a very comprehensive training, but they also cannot provide everything for us. Let's say CBT again is the gold standard, but they may not
Mm,
provide comprehensive trainings for DBT. So they may refer us to some other organizations that offer such trainings, but those are very expensive because those are also taught by professionals. So you need to have the budget for those. And I say transport and food because you don't know where you'll be sent to for placement, and they can be very far away, which also means that it's inaccessible, which also means that it's expensive.
mm,
Sometimes you also work overtime. So there were times when me, myself, and my colleagues we've had to, we couldn't catch the last bus or the last MRT, so we've had to take Grab quite often. Yeah. And then with self-care activities, that's something that the professors, they really encourage us to do. Again, the program is hard. So you need to make sure that you can maintain a certain level of your well-being. Um, and I mean, self-care activities, they come in different types, right? Some are more expensive, some are less, some are free. So if you're someone who likes to travel a lot, I have a classmate of mine. Every time he has a holiday longer than 4 days, then he will go to Taiwan every time. So if you're into these self-care activities, of course, you need to make sure you allocate enough money for that. But I think there's some like individual differences involved. I think these are the areas you need to consider.
mm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we need to consider for the placements, right? The placements where a lot of time is taken and the travel as well. Yeah, I mean, I did my master's in Australia, so it's totally very, very different. Placements can be like 2 hours away, 2 hours drives away. So yeah, imagine that in Singapore, where the place where you stay might be an hour travel every day. That which is similar to work. That comes into play as well. Yeah. So, Chloe, so just for everybody to have a rough understanding, would you have would you have like a rough figure of how much you would be spending on top of school fees, like above school fees on an annual basis?
I'll have to check my bank account. Please give me some time. But I
Okay, okay.
it
Mm,
was good that you mentioned the point about like having to drive to work because if
yeah.
the audience hears, if some of them are interested in not just studying in Singapore, if they're interested in, say, UK, actually some of the programs require you to have a driver's license because the placement sites are just so far. So maybe you guys also need to allocate some money for that.
Yeah,
Let me check my bank
and
account now.
and I do agree about the 2.5 years as well, because some people may need more time for placements or their dissertations and things like that as well. Yeah. So yeah, as you check your bank, uh Rachel, how do you budget for your masters in GCU?
I think quite similar to Chloe. I don't think I budget that well, but I think I can only, and I think it's a very personal question. So it really depends, I guess, on your lifestyle and things like that. But I can probably just share what was helpful for me, at least. So prior to the master's program, I was actually renting on my own. So obviously that's quite a hefty expense. So because I didn't anticipate getting to the program. So when I did, I think that's when I had to really sit down and figure out what to do with my expenses, right? So something that I guess was helpful, or a decision that I made at that point in time, was to move back home. Yeah, so that took, yeah, I guess that leaves you with more expenses to kind of work with, right? So that was what was, I think, most helpful actually. And then I think the other thing was also, even like I mentioned, I applied straight after my undergrad, right? So on hindsight, I would say that having been able to work for at least like 3 to 4 years, I also had kind of like sufficient savings to kind of
Mm,
tide me through. So budgeting wasn't something that I had to put a lot of mental effort into, because
yeah.
like you mentioned, the program is already demanding enough, like um
Mm,
yeah, like having to consciously, really put, yeah, budget, I think personally it would have stressed me out probably more, because I'm not the best at budgeting. So yeah, so that's why I think it really depends on your own needs. But I think I was quite thankful that I got to work at least for
mm,
3 or 4 years before that as well lah. But I
mm,
think yeah, on a day-to-day basis, I would say yeah, I think as with uh whether or not it's a master's program or when you're working, the expenses tend to revolve around transport, food, yeah, things like that lah, mostly. And I
yeah,
didn't
this is true.
travel, yeah, for the whole. So yeah, it depends, right? Yeah, so it sounds
Mm.
very drastic, but I didn't travel for 2 years as well. Yeah,
Before the
so
masters?
no, so before, yeah, so actually, fun fact, before the masters, 2 years, right, was COVID, so obviously couldn't
Oh,
travel. Yeah, so in the back of my head, I was like, yeah, what's another 2 years, right? So I was
best
like,
time to
okay.
save money.
Yes, exactly. So, but really, whatever works for you, because I know people who like, what cannot, that I have to travel, right? So,
Mm.
but for me, it's like, okay, I'll just like, we'll just type through this program, and then, I will have my, yeah. So 2 years of, that also leaves me extra. So yeah, it really depends on your lifestyle, but I was okay with not traveling for 2 years now. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Yeah, so
Mm.
so definitely the working part, going to work helps in terms of the savings, because that's also part of the criteria anyway, right? For the application for the masters, that you need to have at least 2 years of working experience. But for your schools, are you aware of any kind of like scholarship that's available for students? So is
Um,
there anything for NUS?
Yeah, I think there's something called HWB at NUS that offers scholarship for students, but if I'm not wrong, they're mostly only for like locals. So if you're an international student, then you're probably harder to get in. And I think either MOE or MOH, or even perhaps both, they also offer some scholarship. And if you, before entering the program, you already had some experience in the hospitals, I think sometimes they also offer, they don't call it scholarship, they offer sponsorships.
Sponsorships, yeah.
Yeah. So you're not a scholar, but they still provide
Mm.
you money of some sort to help you with doing this program. So these things are all that you can consider.
Yeah, definitely. Rachel, is there
Yeah,
anything at JCU?
I think so similarly to Chloe, I think I'm aware of like if you're already working in maybe like I think public healthcare sector, they do offer sponsorship. So I know people who they've worked a while and then they get sponsored for the 2 years. But then obviously they have to come back, and yeah, so that's one option. I think the other one that I was aware of also is the NCSS one.
Mm.
So I think there's one like it's full or partial. So I think the full one is like okay 2 years, and then the partial one is you do 1 year and then you get sponsored 1 year or something like that. Yeah, so NCSS also has an option. So I think those are the two main ones, at least yeah, that I'm aware of on the
Mm.
JCU. And I think some hospitals I wasn't aware until I think they came to do a talk or something. And
Mm.
then yeah, so some I think if you Google and things like that, some hospitals I think
Yeah.
they do, yeah, they do offer lah also
Yeah.
sponsorships. Yeah.
Correct. So
Yeah.
the NCSS or the ministries or hospitals, they actually might offer this kind of sponsorships if you're already working with them lah, right? Not probably not so much of the private sector, but probably more of the public sector kind of hospitals and things like that. But I think in terms of scholarships, would be good to refer to the school websites because it changes from time to time as well. Yeah, it depends on whether the funds are there and the donors are there to give the scholarship. So it really depends on the school in terms of this scholarship options and bursary options as well. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I'm going down as we go. So the next two questions, how do you choose? Like, is there like in terms of your choices, right? Because like Chloe, you went through the UK system, you went through you went through the Hong Kong system, and then for Rachel as well, you went through the Australian system, and then you're back in Singapore doing in JCU. So how do you choose this program and your universities? And in your consideration, were you comparing how do you compare between like the programs in Singapore versus in other countries?
Rachel, do you want to answer?
Yeah, it's a hard question. Yeah, and I know it because there's so many programs out
Um,
there. Yeah.
yeah, I'm very cautious to like kind of like if there's really no right or wrong, or like there's one program that's better than the other.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think for myself definitely a big part of it was the APEC consideration.
Mm.
Yeah, so I think for an Australian program, that's kind of it's more structured in that way. So there wasn't really too many considerations, I would say. So if let's say I chose to pursue it in Australia, they have a very interesting system where you just send in one application. They have it in a unified system, right? And then it goes out to all
Yeah.
the schools. So yeah, that's how it usually works over there. So yeah, and I think most of the programs over there, once it's APEC accredited, it's kind of like assuring that they're mostly there wouldn't be too much variations and things like that. Like it's held to a certain standard. So for me, because I came back, I personally naturally gravitated to an Australian program. Hence, JCU was kind of more natural option for me to go
Mm.
with. I definitely did consider NUS, but I think because I was more familiar and comfortable with an Australian system, that I
Mm.
just pursued that lah. Yeah, that's for myself. Mm.
Is is JCU still holding on to their APEC registration status, if you're
Currently,
aware?
yeah, so no, actually. So from what I heard, I don't think it's currently APEC accredited. Yeah. Mm.
Mm. Because it changes
So
year to year and the criteria of APEC
yes,
as well. Lah. Mm.
correct. And so if you're considering registration in Australia, you still can, from what I heard, you still can, but I think the process would probably be a little bit more different. Like, it's less straightforward. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. And this is for their only for the masters or also for their undergraduate? Because what if students, I mean, there must be some
Yeah.
undergraduates doing studying in JCU
Okay,
and
I'm not
planning
too
to move to
familiar.
Australia.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with the undergrad program because I didn't do my
Okay.
undergrad with JCU. Yeah,
Ah, okay,
yeah.
okay. Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Yeah. But yeah, that's something to note about the APEC and because of accreditation lah. APEC is for those who are not sure, is the Australian Psychology Accreditation Council. So it accreditates and recognizes the courses and allows the transition from undergraduate to your honors to your masters as well. Yeah. Um, I mean, I did mine in Australia, and I traveled across three different unis because of this accreditation. So you just keep moving, yeah. Because they recognize your courses in that way. So yeah, what about Chloe? What like why NUS? I
I th-
mean, yeah.
yeah, when I chose a master's program, I also consider what is the university famous for? Because I think all
Mm,
universities and also all hospitals, they have they're famous for something, right? Maybe they're famous for certain specialties. And then where I'm from, some of the universities that offer Psych, they're big on, let's say, sleep disorders. Whereas NUS, they seem to have experts in every area. So I think that's something for you to consider. You can always look at like the list of the labs that they have or like list of the research teams. I think that gives you a good idea as to what the uni does and what they do well. And then I think another thing to consider is where you want to work in the future. I think from what I know, correct me if I'm wrong, from what I know, if you work in Australia, you probably only get like a licensure to work in a certain state, right? That's what I heard. So if
you mean in Australia?
yeah,
I think it's okay for if you are able to get the APRA, the AHPRA registration. I think it applies for all states. Yeah,
oh,
it's just different specializations when it comes to APRA. Yeah.
okay. So yeah, I think these things are all that we
Mm.
need to consider because if you want to work in, I think,
But
okay,
mm,
then
yes,
US.
US,
Yeah,
yes,
then
US the one
US.
is based on state, and
Yeah,
then
yeah, yeah.
the examination and the registration is based on state. Yeah, that's in US. Yeah.
Yeah, so it depends on where you want to work at. If you want to work in
Yeah.
a certain country, then there may be job opportunities that are outside of your state. Then you also need to, I don't know, apply for another licensure. And so it can get difficult. So you need to consider where you want to work in the long term. And I mean, Psych is also a language specific and culture specific subject. Um, so, I mean, even in Asia, there are many different cultural practices also, right? And you also
Mm,
notice in your clinical practice that the clients do respond differently. Some may prefer something more collaborative in nature, some prefer more directive. Um, so you need to consider what you prefer, where you are going to stay after your graduation. So that
mm,
helps me decide where I want to go. But I would also say kind of depends on what universities take you in. Because I also applied for Australia actually, but I didn't even pass the APAC one because I think my university, it was a Bachelor of Social Sciences rather than a Bachelor of Psychology. So I don't meet
mm,
some of their criteria. Um,
mm,
so I couldn't even apply for the universities themselves because I didn't pass
mm, mm,
the APAC. So
mm.
these are some things for you to consider.
Yeah, the countries where the education it's easier if they recognize like let's say if it's UK like Australia to Australia to Australia it's easier, and UK to UK sometimes it's easier to as well. And I think one of the recommendations, because some students do ask me where should I study, a lot of times I tell them, it really depends on your undergraduate, which country it is from, and because of this they understand their systems within their countries, so sometimes it's easier to proceed and stay within that country, like Australia, all the way, or UK all the way, or US all the way kind of system, because they understand their own system. But when you go from a UK to Australia, Australia might not understand the UK system. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So, yeah, so we know that this masters, to get into the masters is quite competitive, but realistically, how competitive is this masters? Do you have any are you able to share anything about how competitive it is? Or is there anything that you think that help you stand out in your applications?
I always struggle with this question because I think it's very well, yeah, it's pretty well known that the master's program is notoriously competitive.
Mm,
But I think it does vary from year to year, from what I understand. So, depending on I think the intakes each year and the number of applicants, it's very hard to say whether or not it's uniformly competitive, or like some years are different. So at least if I'm not wrong, like for my year, there was like usually like 100 over applicants to, I guess, 13 12 or 13 spots usually. Yeah, but I'm not sure if that ratio is the same for every single year. Yeah. So I guess when we're talking about um the odds, I think I understand that the program does specify a certain um I guess your academic, there's an academic component. So usually I think it's a second uppers to a first or something like that,
First
right?
class?
So yes,
Mm.
correct. So I guess, but I understand like one of the rationales which was actually communicated was because it is a very demanding program. So that's something to really keep in mind when you're considering a master's program. And they don't set that criteria for no reason, or they don't set these criteria for no reason. So the work experience, in my own experience, has actually been very helpful. Not only for for I think no one goes into the master's program also, being like knowing how to do certain things, but the exposure definitely helps, I would say. So yeah, so the criteria, as strict as it may be, or it's hard and fast, but I would say no criteria has been set for no good reason.
Mm.
Yeah. So I would say things like experience does help. I think like Hui alluded to also the research and
Yep.
things like that. So um yeah, so that the thesis component actually surprisingly is quite useful and important as well. But I think at the end of the day also comes back to there's that the interview component that is really kind of something that I don't think I can safely say what they're looking out for. And yeah, so there's no I don't have any specific
Mm.
hacks for the program.
Mm.
But I think so long as there's there's that learning orientation, or at least some things I feel like might stand out. The willingness to be vulnerable, I think that's very important. I think they don't want, because I remember how I prepared for the first time I applied to the second time I applied. It was very different. So I was very into the first time I applied. Oh, like what do you think they might look out for? I always thought there was a checklist of things, right? Because criteria wise. So it can come across quite like you just want to get in the program because you want to. But I think when it comes to the interview process, that's when things are more organic, right? So I think they really want to know, what's your inherent motivation for the program. So I think that's where the exposure also comes in hand, where you really
Mm.
understand your own motivation, because that comes through an interview for sure.
Yep.
Yeah. Bearing in mind that you're being interviewed by psychologists.
Mm.
So, they'll probably be able to pick on some of these things. So I think really that's something that I don't think I can really say what specifically they're looking out for. I can probably allude to like what are some maybe value adds that might be
Mm.
helpful in my own experience also lah. So yeah, so I think it would vary, I would say.
So work experience and knowing why you want to do the program, and knowing yourself, that is very important as you go into this applications. Yeah, so the thing is that I just also want to maybe share with everybody in terms of this competitiveness. Do we see this across, like, even across different countries? Like if you apply to different countries, like Chloe mentioned, you apply Australia, and I don't know if Rachel, you applied to Australia as well, different universities.
I
Like, is this
considered it.
competitiveness across the whole?
Wow, I remember going. So Australia has like, I think their own version of our like hardware forum or something. But for students, like they call it like Whirlpool or something. I can't remember if it's still up. So I remember, I think I was toying between pursuing it in Australia versus pursuing it in Singapore. So I think by the time that I just had like went into the forums to kind of understand more about the application and things like that, and hear from the students. And I can safely say it is equally, if not more competitive there as well, because of the sheer number of people over there as well. Yeah, I'm not sure if the landscape has changed, but I remember, like, if I thought I was quite kiasu coming back, and like yeah, I think it can get quite competitive over there. So reading it was quite interesting as well. Yeah, so I think it's just, I think it's quite unfortunate. It's more of it's a system kind of like limitation that unfortunately they can't offer more, because it's such a rigorous program as well, training wise. So it's not like they can just ramp up the intake as and when they want as well, even
So
though yes, we do need it lah.
so roughly how big is your intakes? Like how big is your classes? Because this would mean in terms of the competitiveness, how big are your
Yeah.
classes for GCU and US?
For GCU, at least during my batch, I'm not sure if it varies across the batches as well. I don't think it varies too much, but at least for my batch, we have 13 of us.
13.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm, mm, mm.
What about in NUS, Chloe?
My batch, I have 20 students. Like
20
including
students.
there are 20 students. And I think in my the junior batch, I think there are 24.
Okay. So it varies around that numbers in that way.
Yes, I think so.
Would,
Yeah. And then
would
if
you
you're talking about like other countries, I know a little bit more about Hong Kong because that's where I'm from. Um,
sure.
so the last time I checked, it's 19 per university, and there are 2 universities that offer this course.
Mm. So you have a lot of students applying for very, very little seats, in a way to say. Yeah.
Actually, yes. And also because sometimes the placement supervisors or like the professors also share with us like their experience. But they share from the experience as like an interviewer. They might also say that, oh my God, this year the candidates are very strong. They also don't know how to choose the candidates. So I think that speaks volume as to how hard it is
Mm.
to get in.
So yeah, maybe you can share a little bit of your. I mean, if you can remember how that event when you went for your interviews. Rachel said she went twice, and how do you like? What was the process like for you? Like when you went in, how do you feel? Yeah, what went through it? Like, or how was it for both of you in NUS and JCU?
I think for me, it was slightly better because that was COVID time, and also because I wasn't in Singapore, so I had to do the interview over Zoom. So for me, it was less anxiety provoking.
Mm,
Yeah, but I suppose that's also a part of what you need to learn or do to prepare for an interview. You need to be able to manage your own emotions. For example, for me, I know that when I get anxious, I would want to go to the toilet. So I wouldn't drink any water or eat anything before. So yeah, I think that's important. So in terms of like emotions wise, how I feel, I would say I could regulate the anxiety. But once I'm in the interview and they ask me questions about myself, I am the expert of myself. I need to be able to answer their questions. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
So self-regulation, knowing how to control your anxiety, going in somewhat prepared about how you want to answer those questions, right? Yeah.
Mm.
So Rachel, how's your interview process like how's the interview process like in JCU?
Again, I think it varies from year to year. So, and I think it depends on how you personally prep for interviews. I think I am an over prepper, definitely. So, anxiety was driving it. I think for myself, I definitely would I think I anticipate, because I think quite commonly during the interview process, it doesn't go too far from, like in terms of the task, right? A role play or like a written assessment. It doesn't stray too far. They can either give you either, or they give you both, right? So I would, and I remember watching like YouTube videos of like different like people sharing their tips about the process and things like that. So I think speaking to
Mm,
people who are in the program, or um yeah, and finding out what their experience was like. So I did that. So I did prep for, like a potential role play, or like a, just in case. Yeah, but I think I remember not feeling. I think if I were to interview when I was a fresh grad versus my interview after um working for a while, I think that helped to reduce the anxiety a little bit, because I think I had more of an identity of who, what I wanted to do in the clean side. So I felt like I could be more organic in that sense. So I didn't feel like I had to churn out an answer for an interview, or anticipate too much what they're looking for. I felt confident enough to be able to draw on my experience to answer the questions, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think that's why I think I do advocate for gaining that quite strongly, for gaining that
Experience.
work experience. Yeah, because it does build a little bit of that confidence
Yeah.
for you to manage the questions, because you really can't predict the questions.
Yeah.
So the process, sometimes, yeah, I think, they might want to also don't know what they're gonna assess, right? Sometimes they might assess competency, but like I said, no one goes into the program being like a fully competent like site, like knowing what to do. So sometimes they look more for like the softer skills that, clean sites usually possess as well. So that's also kind of like not something you can kind of prepare for, right? So to speak, but it does come with, if you had done previous clinical work before and you've honed some of these skills beforehand,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That
So
that helps us answer the second question already. Is it usually
oh
is it
great.
experience with scale? So I would say it's
Yeah,
highly
yeah, yeah.
recommended, like what everybody here is saying, so that
Yeah,
you can internalize these experiences and go for the
correct.
interview with this experience that you
Yeah.
have from work.
So
Yeah.
surprisingly, right,
Mm,
even though I prepped for a role play, and right, eventually, at least during my year, I didn't get it. I didn't have
mm,
to do it. Yeah, so like I say, I really can't tell you, oh,
yeah.
it's gonna go this way, it's gonna go that way. So at the end of the day, trust yourself also.
Mm,
Yeah. To, feel like, you just bring your best self to the interview. I
mm.
think that's half the battle won. Yeah.
I'm rephrasing the third question, because it is a bit hard for us to say what are the chances. But rephrasing the question in a different way, do both of you have any understanding of like where are your classmates from? Like are they specifically from like JCU, NUS, like the top three unis in Singapore, like JCU, NUS, NTU, SMU, or are they from other um like other schools as well?
I think NUS makes it easy for us to answer this question because they actually have a page that has all of our profiles there.
Uh,
So everyone, if you're interested, you may go to the NUS department and check out our
mm,
educational and professional qualifications. But from what I remember, I think there are indeed many classmates of mine who are from NUS and NTU. Some also graduated from Australian and UK universities.
mm.
Also studying psychology. Yeah.
What about in JCU, Rachel?
So in GCU, we definitely had some quite a number of the JC those who studied in JCU, who did their undergrad in JCU. So if I'm not wrong, JCU is a private university, right?
Yeah. Mm,
Yeah, so there were batchmates from JCU. There were also from NUS, and some from overseas universities. So it was quite varied. There was also, because I think I roughly browsed like a question about mid-career. I think I did have a batchmate who did do a mid-career switch, but I think she did like her honors year in JCU as well. That's why I would consider her like from JCU. But yeah,
mm, mm. So
yeah.
it varies, like it varies, and
It does.
I mean, from what we can say, that the university takes in pretty much the students from all around the place, from different countries as well, as long as it fits their criteria, lah. But from your experience, would would it be good to have done a thesis in your fourth year, in your honors year? And are you aware of anybody who haven't done a thesis in their honors year? Is there any way that can get into the master's program that way.
I don't know anyone personally, but I checked the program website on behalf of everyone. So last time I checked, which was a Thursday, apparently you don't necessarily need to have a thesis, although it will be good if you can supplement your research experience with perhaps you've been a research assistant before, or that you have published a paper in a peer-reviewed journal before. So they'll also consider this. So I think it's good that they're also being flexible. But I think they also stated that it's a case-by-case basis. So yeah, you may or may not succeed with an application without a thesis. Although if you do manage to get in, I would say that it would be good if you have experience doing a thesis itself, because it's very different from, being a research assistant and following instructions given to you by your seniors, right? With the thesis, you have to be the person who's fully responsible for all the data collection. You oversee everything, you coordinate everything, you analyze the data yourself. I think it's a very different experience. And if you already have that experience in undergrad, then of course it will be useful as you have to go through it again for a master's thesis.
Is it the same, Rachel, on your
I'm not
side?
sure if it's changed, but from what I understand, I never knew it was an option. Like it was optional. So yeah, so from my understanding, for example, if you didn't do an honors year for an Australian program, an alternative option would be to do a graduate diploma, because that will give you also, you have to do a research project. So you do need to do some form of a research project, an independent one, because in the masters, you would have to be writing a thesis. So the honors year or a grad date, when you do a thesis, you would be exposed to advanced statistical stuff. So that would actually be very useful for your masters as well. So personally I didn't know it was optional or on a case by
Um,
case basis
No,
probably.
I
Yeah.
think I'm not entirely sure. I mean, some of the audience might know here. I think the unis for some of them it's optional. They can use modules. It may be optional. They might use modules to substitute for the thesis or something like
Okay.
that. Yeah. So from what you're saying, if they haven't done the research component, probably they may have to do a grad dip or something like an
Yeah.
additional year before they apply to chalk up in terms of that, in writing of the thesis lah. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, you all mentioned that the course is very stressful, very tight, and you can't do full-time work because when we're talking about the budget just now, right? Like it's quite yeah. So I think we already answered. Is it true when pursuing a clinical master's you're not permitted to hold positions of gainful employment? Is there even time to do like part-time work, full-time work from your understanding of your load in your course?
I thought we are permitted, except they really don't encourage it.
It's permitted but not encouraged, okay?
Yeah, because I think some of the lecturers, they also shared that back then when they were in the program, they were also thinking of having like a part-time job, but of course they all quit after maybe a week or so. Um, because again, it's just too much work, and they also don't want to lead us to burnout. Yeah, but
Mm.
I think, let's say if you're an international student, that's definitely a no-no. Because I think it's something to do with the student versus work visa, or in Singapore we call them passes, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite similar. I had batchmates who tried I think working part-time as well, and then they had to, I think probably when placement started, especially once you go into your placements, that's when I think the load, you will really feel the load, and then most of them had to
Mm.
stop as well. So yeah, I don't think it's like a strict no, but also wasn't really quite encouraged. But if you do, it would be good to kind of let the staff, the academic staff know as well, because I think one thing to be mindful of is when you are employed elsewhere, that's another stress on yourself. And then if it interferes with the clinical work that you do on your placements, that can affect your performance also. And our placements are all graded, so you kind of don't want to shortchange yourself in that sense. Yeah. So just something to be mindful of, even though maybe you can juggle, but I think it, like I mentioned right at the start, it can be a very demanding program lah.
Do you have classes like 5 days a week or something? Like, how's your timetable like?
Oh, okay. So for JCU, I was quite thankful that they structured it in a way that they help you to clear your modules first, as many as you can. So we were only left with probably one academic module somewhere in the third semester or so, but we cleared most of our modules in like the first semester. And then we were able to focus on like the thesis and the placements in the subsequent semesters. So I think that structure worked out really well. So in the first semester when we were it was purely modules. I think if I can remember correctly, we had modules every day. And then when it came to placements, then it's usually 2 or 3 days a week. And then there's protected time for your thesis writing as well. So it depends on which placements that you are, then your days of the week might vary. So in the semester where we had post placements and then an extra module to clear, then that's when the week can be have been more full, I would say. Yeah. So when it came to placement, then that's where there's supposed to be a little bit more flexibility. But when we were just doing academic modules, then it was more structured. So I think it was like a Monday to Friday thing. Yeah.
Monday, Friday. Okay, for the
timetable.
from
Yeah,
the
there was a
beginning. Yeah,
timetable.
timetable.
Yeah.
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 What about the timetable at in NUS?
I think it differs every year, and also it depends on what there are rooms available for us. But I think NUS they try to schedule some of the lessons together so that you don't have to come back to the campus so often, especially when the placement started. So I would say it's slightly similar to what Rachel described of JCU, because we of course also need to have some prerequisite knowledge before we can enter the workplace as interns, right? So we also had to do quite a lot of courses. In fact, I think the majority of the courses before we started placement. And then when placement started, then that's when some of the research modules or like maybe statistical modules or like something more advanced that comes in to supplement our skills in our placement.
Okay. Yeah, so those are the pre-questions that the people submitted quite a lot already. So here are some. We're moving on to the live Q&A that some of the audience have put up, and still very thankful that we have over 100 people here in the room. So yeah, so we've got some comments and from people. Yeah, that's very encouraging, and thank you for sharing, everybody. So maybe the first question is for Rachel. How do you get the opportunity to try the different fields? Like we're talking about your work, before your masters, right? So how do you manage to hop from like the ABA side of things and then eventually ended up at the organizational side of things as well?
Okay. Thanks for the question. I think personally for me, it's a mix of I think you have to be quite gung-ho lah also to kind of like put yourself out there. So I remember I think it looks differently from an undergrad to when I graduated. But I remember in undergrad I sent out like a bunch of emails asking for an internship and things like that. And then I think it's quite common now. I'm seeing more associate side roles, but I think during my a few years back, that was actually I think quite hard to get as well. So I remember I mentioned those that I managed, like the experiences that I had that I managed to get, but I don't think I mentioned those that I didn't get as well. So I remember applying to MSF as a research psychologist, didn't get that. I think there was one Ministry of Defense psychologist, didn't get that. IMH, I think associate site at the time was very competitive as well, so didn't get that. So yeah, so it was really, I think, because like I mentioned, knowing what I wanted and knowing what I didn't want was important to me. So really
Mm,
also comes back to what's important to you. I wanted to know that, this is something that really resonated with me inherently, that I really would be confident in my choices. So that's why I think I really proactively, so the proactively kind of search for this opportunity. So yeah, so that was how I think look for this different, and like Carlin alluded to also, I think along the way, once you gain experience in a certain area, you will start to notice, I would like to gain in this area, because that's now a gap, right? A gap in knowledge, a gap in expertise, whatever. So then that's when you move, and that's when you look for new opportunities. So I think I kind of use that as a little bit of a compass, a little bit of a guidance to, the range of experiences that I try to look for myself that would fit also. Yeah, some might not fit as well, but yeah, I think just that helped me to navigate the work experience side of things. Yeah.
mm. Yeah, so in coming back to the idea of work before the application as well, and we discussed that much earlier, right? But in terms of that, how, like, for both Chloe and Rachel, um, how do you know which are there any how do you know which organizations to go to, or is there any, like, organizations that that you would actually suggest, or types of organizations that you actually suggest for people who are considering to go into clinical side?
I would say
I understand the question. Is it before or after graduating
Before,
from the
before.
master's?
That means like
Okay,
you
okay.
went into mines, you went into SPF. Like what kind of, are there any type of organizations that you would recommend? Because the question is asking about ICA. But ICA probably may give the sponsorship, but he's not sure about the support. But
Mm.
is there any kind of organizations that we are thinking that you might actually get the experience and probably get the opportunities as well, for you to get into the masters?
I
Maybe
would,
Chloe can take that question.
I would say hospitals, in my opinion, is a good choice. Even though I didn't get to work in hospital before joining the program, I think that I would say it's hospitals because personal experience, or like listening to my lecturers, it seems like several of them consider the hospital standard as the gold standard. And I mean, from what I know about the difference between hospital and community settings, the clients that you get in hospital seem to be more clinical, whereas for those in community settings, there may be maybe more to do with family issues or maybe child protection. And so if you're talking about clinical viewpoint, I feel like in a hospital, it will be a better place to get experience. But that's just like my personal opinion. And then ICA, that's to do with immigration, is it?
I would believe so.
Yeah,
Need to
so
cross check, but I believe so. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think okay, drawing inspiration from Hong Kong, I think they might want someone with like psychology experience there, because there are also a lot of people who might be like refugees who have to be sent back to their own countries, and they also have a lot of yeah, emotional difficulties of their own now, the fact that they're refugees in the first place, and also the fact that they're here in a new country, they need to adjust to a new environment, new cultural experiences and all that. I think that's why perhaps this ICA is offering an
It
opportunity.
really depends on what is the work, like the job description from there, I think. Yeah.
Depends on how you brand it when it comes to the interview.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Rachel, any recommendations?
I think something that stands out, at least in my own work experience, is when you join organizations, be it a community setting, so like like a VWO or even like a public setting. One thing good about like bigger organizations is their training is more structured, versus if you kind of look out for positions in like a private practice, you don't really get that close clinical supervision, or it's less structured in a way. So I think a lot of the time it's you figuring things out on your own, whereas in these bigger organizations, there is a clearer kind of like a training pathway, so to speak, as well. So as a young aspiring psychologist or a young psychologist, usually I would recommend to go into such organizations, because I think it's the structure can be quite beneficial for your own learning, and initial training.
Yeah, I mean, the usual advice that I give to people would be you need to understand yourself. Coming back to what Rachel mentioned again, you need to understand yourself, understand what kind of industry that you would like to work in. You know, it could be education, it could be mental health, it could be, healthcare and things like that. What is the industry that you want to work in? Who are the clientele that you would like to work with as well, right? Because and then you are comfortable working with that clientele, because if you go into the work and you if you don't like your work, you don't like your clients, and then it becomes very difficult on you when you're trying to do your work as well. Yeah. So and so I mean I'm going down to, because we have a lot of questions, so I think my team is trying to like pick out similar ones and then putting up on the slides here as well. Yeah. Um so in terms of knowing yourself, in terms of the just now I think we the below question was something about imposter syndrome. But coming back to here would be like, how do you know if you're ready? How do you know if you're ready to do your masters? Yeah. What are some signs or some traits that you can see within yourselves? Because that's a goal that everybody have, right? But yeah, some of them,
To me, I think it comes with maturity, and also if you've already possessed a lot of knowledge on this field, then of course, as you do your masters, it will be a little bit less for you lah. For me, for example, I already learned a little bit about CBT. So for me, this course is almost like an add-on course. So I learned more about disorder-specific stuff rather than the general therapy skills. So I think what you come in to the program with is important. And again, I keep mentioning emotion management, because there will be a lot of work, and I don't think we can change that. So your mindset is really important. So are you someone
mm,
who will like panic when it comes to having a lot of work? Or uh, in terms of time management, are you skilled in that? Are you skilled at prioritizing tasks that are important or based on its deadline or based on how easy it is to do it? I think all of these you need to keep in mind. And I think, yeah, resilience. Yeah, I think it depends on many things, and also whether you actually like interacting with the clients. Because like what you say, the clients, they can have different, like as in what the question says, some clients, they come in with different problems. So if you already have certain experiences with those, or like you have a lot of insight with such concerns, then of course you will feel like it's easier to handle them. But at the same time, you need to, okay, boundary setting is also important. Because I think for some clinicians, as soon as they walk outside of the therapy room, then they probably will maybe not forget what the clients say, but they don't feel as emotionally attached. So I think, I mean, in your daily life, you
that's
gauge how well you're doing with people with emotional difficulties, right?
mm,
Some of our friends
mhm.
also turn to us for to seek help. So you can gauge whether, you are
That's
caught
a
up by their emotional storm and all that.
That's a skill that I think regardless of counseling or psychologists, we should all have. Yeah. Something to, when you walk out and you're yourself, you're not your client. You are not taking on to this, you're not holding on to your client's emotions and things like that. Yeah. So yeah, so thanks Rachel and Chloe for your inputs. Could we have the next slide? Yeah. So yeah, so yeah, because I'm just mindful of time and we're supposed to end about in the 5 minutes time. So what I would advise everybody to do is join our Telegram group. in the group we have a lot of psychology students, there are some practitioners there as well, and we are more than happy to answer any of your questions regarding about work, regarding about studies, regarding about like internships, and then you'll see different news even asking about, and even asking about the journey. And so this group is supposed to build a community to support everybody in your journey in psychology. So yeah, so it's only about a year old, exactly a year old this now. But what we have over 1,200 people there already. So yeah, if you can scan the QR code up here, and then I think you will be allowed into the group once the moderator actually gets to you and asks you some questions. We want to make sure that there's no bots in the group. I think that's what we do, right? We want this to be a very organic group with no bots and all real humans wanting to help each other in psychology. Yeah. So yes, yeah, my team will coordinate the camera. So I think they'll put off the slides, and if you're comfortable, please turn on your cameras. If you're not, it's okay to leave your cameras off. But yeah, I would ask if as many people as possible to actually turn on your cameras, and then maybe Yasmin, you can coordinate this part.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Okay, let me see. I'll just wait a little bit more for
Yeah,
more.
we got feedback. We got feedback after this. So just ask everybody to stay if you can. Yeah, just to give us your
Yes.
feedback.
Okay. Let me remove spotlight so I can have everyone together in one page. Okay. Yeah, I'll just give everyone about like 30 seconds more, and then we'll just take a mass photo. Okay, I'll just take some. Okay, in 3, 2, 1. Okay, just one more. Okay, yeah, thank you everyone. And you can see in the chat, we've actually put in our feedback form. We appreciate if you can take some time to help us fill it in.